Hi, Trisha.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well.
I can't believe you're here. This is amazing. I cannot imagine what this past week has been like for you and your family and your team and all of your
Mm.
staff.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. And it's been transformative. I'm not sure what's coming out of it yet. I won't know for some time, but whatever it is, it's meant to be. I feel incredibly fortunate and blessed, and so many people lost so much more than I have. But I'm also not ignoring the loss. So it's a really fascinating experience. It really is.
I can imagine the grief, and the mixed emotions, and yeah, the grief over time, memories, things. Thankfully, your family is safe, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of, even like you talked about in your LinkedIn post, you are feeling some sense of freedom from the attachment to these things, but there is still a tie. We have
there
soul ties
is.
to things that we don't even realize, and
And
it's not good or bad. It just is.
absolutely. That's my catchphrase this week. It's not good or bad. It is, and well, this as well as anyone, right? We are meaning making machines, right? So we give meaning to all these things, and it's beautiful, right? When I think about, I was just reflecting this morning. I've only lived in this house for just under a year, and it was the first time in my life I've moved countless times. I need to sit down and do the list. And there were a number of times I thought I was done. This is another one of them. And I intentionally, I typically move in a matter of weeks. Like I'm fanatic, right? Like a typical entrepreneur, like everything done. I got my list. I'm organized. Da, 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 da. I don't sleep my weekends, whatever, until I'm done. And this time I took a different approach. I said, I'm going to give myself a year, sat with it, did different things. But over the course of that year, I'm just renting the house. I have spent, probably easily $100,000 of new things, let alone everything I brought that I've had forever. But brand new things I put into a rental home because I loved it that much and believed I was going to be there. But I don't have any regrets about any of that, any of it. I built that into be a beautiful, and my partner was very active in that, even though she didn't live there. And, we're going through a mourning process, and we actually hiked in there, through the desolation to, you know, really see it and begin the mourning process. And but I don't regret any of it. I don't regret any of it. I would do it again, and I will do it again. I will do
Yeah.
it again.
How are the girls? How are your daughters?
Oh, they're great. So my girls are. I've got kind of my family of sort of origin, and then sort of a merging family with my partner. But my girls are in their 20s, and they went through their own loss when their mother and I split a couple of years ago, amicably, but that's been difficult. So they lost the home they grew up in when we sold that. And I had them both with me the week after Christmas with a cousin. And it was beautiful. They loved the house. We spent a lot of time there. We went hiking in the neighborhood. We walked down to the village, and they absolutely loved it. And I spent a lot of time helping them both see you have a home. You can store your things here. You can come here. You're welcome here. And that took them a little while, but I think they were finally settling into it. And so I've connected with them, and they're both going through their own loss. The other thing I've realized that, it's easy to know these things, but it's different to experience is everybody deals with things differently, right? And so they're each going through their own emotional journey around this, what they miss, what they lost, the fantasies they've had. the term now, mourning the lost fantasies. I had dreams of them coming back and spending time here. But then also my partner has two young kids, 11 and 9, and they love this place too. Siva had her 11th birthday party there at the pool. Rumi loves it, comes there regularly. They'll spend weekends there. And so, they're going through their loss as well. So it's been, an extraordinary experience. And the one thing I'm finally learning, like I mentioned, is don't move too quickly past the loss. And I know this, and entrepreneurs are so great at this, right? We move on, we move
Yeah.
forward. It's always what's next, move on. It's beautiful, beautiful. And there's value, there's lesson, there's benefit that's life, but also in business, right? How do you learn from what you've lost, what you've missed, the pain, the suffering, that's all learning. So this time I'm not missing out on any of that. And I'm trying to give space to everybody around me to go through what they want to go through. I was talking to my team this morning. One woman, Catherine, lives in San Francisco now. But she has a place in Santa Monica, and her place is intact, but her renters had to move out. She was in tears, and one of the things she said is she feels survivor's guilt, right? Like feels some guilt for not being there, and that's a legitimate
Yeah.
experience to go through, right? You can't judge, somebody else's experience.
Well, normally I do a little intro, and I will do that. But if it's okay, I'd like to capture some of this for the listeners as well.
Sure.
And maybe this would be something that you look at in
Oh,
posterity
sure.
and
I
remember
actually thought
this.
I thought we were.
Yeah, yeah. I normally would, might shave stuff off the beginning and end, but I think we'll leave this in because
Yeah.
it's so authentic, and this is what's real life, and this is what people need to hear. So for the listeners, depending on when you're listening to this episode or watching this episode, we are filming in January 2025, just after some tragic fires that swept across Los Angeles, California. And Mark was one of the many people who lost his home, completely lost everything that he had, that he owned. And we were scheduled to record, and I thought we would cancel because, my goodness, how do you record and just act normal whenever you've lost everything? But Mark is here. So I'm really grateful to have you here on this show, Mark, at a time like this. And I appreciate you trusting me because this is a very much a heart issue. And I can imagine there are some certain environments where you just aren't good quality for you right now. So I appreciate you being here.
You're welcome, Tricia. So thank you for having me. And no, look, you're right. I've had a phrase for a couple of years now, but I'm applying it more than ever, which is a whole body yes. I don't have a whole body yes to
Yeah.
something. I am not doing
Yeah.
it, and I have canceled a lot in the last week. But for some reason, this seemed right to me to do this, and so I'm here by choice. I'm here fully present, and let's see what comes up.
What we talk about on the show a lot, the show is really designed to help global change makers build sustainable businesses and that can impact thousands, be profitable, and have something left to themselves at the end of the day. And the show is uniquely designed to help entrepreneurs just kind of bypass the overwhelm, skip the burnout, and borrow from what actually works from the best and brightest mentors. And I am so honored for all of you to get to meet Mark from ZICO coconut water on the show. So, one of the core tenets of pretty much everything I talk about, and I actually talked about it in the last episode, that is so important to build a sustainable business when times are good or even when you're in the messy middle, because you don't know when the times are going to hit, that you're going to lose control of everything, possibly lose access to everything. And I really want to encourage all of you to work in your business and on your business as if you're going to sell it one day. And today we have the privilege of hearing from someone who is perhaps one of the most genuine and compassionate entrepreneurs and business leaders on the planet. And he's done just that and more. So Mark Rampolla took his impact business full cycle from startup to scale to sale, and then went back and built it even bigger and better than it was before. Mark is the visionary entrepreneur and the founder of ZICO Coconut Water, a brand that really helped create the now $8 billion global coconut water category. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you will recognize this beautiful bright blue bottle with the white writing. This is a staple in our home. It has been for quite some time. And so you'll recognize this, and maybe you'll see it in the store. If you don't already or not familiar with it, you'll see it and you'll notice it. So, though this is the first time that Mark and I are chatting kind of in real time, I feel like I know him and his family after listening to his audiobook, High Hanging Fruit. And he narrated it himself. So hearing his voice, I feel like it takes me back to my walks when I was listening to Mark. And even my husband downloaded it and said, wow, he's got a really incredible voice. He could do this for a living. So I will link to Mark's book, High Hanging Fruit, in the show notes. This will give you, I know Mark's going to talk about the story behind ZICO, but this will give you something kind of more of insight into the beginning and also some of the challenges that Mark dealt with early on. So Mark wrote High Hanging Fruit really for those who want to succeed because of, not in spite of, their values. And I talk a lot on the show about living by your values, working in your business based on and creating your business based on your values, because that's really one of the keys to prevent burnout and overwhelm. And the book is really designed for people who believe that it's their duty to reach higher than just the bottom line, to build businesses driven by passion, purpose, and integrity. And above all, it's a call to arms for this new generation, aka you, my listeners, who are disrupting the old model, and you're doing business by doing good. So fast forward 20 years, I did the math and I thought, oh my gosh, has it really been 20 years since 2004? And it's easy to see that, Mark has really embodied the message that he shared and with the world when he wrote High Hanging Fruit. So after growing ZICO into one of the fastest growing beverage companies worldwide, he sold the company to Coca-Cola in 2013. And he transitioned into investing, co-founding Power Plant Partners, where he played a key role in the plant-based food movement, including the success of Beyond Meat, which some of you might see in some of your stores, especially in Europe, I believe. In 2020, Mark made a bold move and repurchased ZICO from Coca-Cola with a group of investors. And so now through GroundForce Capital, Mark manages $500 million in assets, focusing on health, wellness, and sustainability investments. His journey, it really reflects a deep commitment to innovation and the positive change in the consumer goods industry. Mark, thank you so much again
You're
for being
welcome.
on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So, Mark, I've shared a little bit, a little teeny tiny bit, but can you tell us about yourself, some of your, just kind of hit on to give people some context? Where did you grow up and what was your early career like before ZICO?
Sure, happy to. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, youngest of six kids, and no entrepreneurs in the family. My grandfather was mixed success, but I joke that the most successful business person I knew growing up was a family friend that was the Southwestern Pennsylvania sales representative for Maxwell House Coffee. Not a business family at all. And then, but I loved it. A great upbringing. A beautiful place to be raised. Then college at Wisconsin at Marquette University. I started to meet some business-minded people, some people that grew up in entrepreneurial families. Started to get a little bit of interest, but I still thought that I had an interest in business, and I sort of thought corporations around the world. That's where you go to, build business, make money, make some sort of impact. But I also had, my family was very socially minded too, sort of social activists. So I had that upbringing as well. So I wound up joining the Peace Corps. So my first career was, sort of off the dirt path as a Peace Corps volunteer in Central America, doing microfinance and early ecotourism programs in Costa Rica, of all places. This is it's been there pre-zip lines and Four Seasons. But still a beautiful place to live for a few years. And that kind of got me hooked on international, Spanish, Latin America, and this sort of environmental impact realm as well. I went back to grad school, did an MBA and joint environmental management degrees at Duke University, and then wound up getting a job with a global paper company because, it was not a lot of people were hiring ex-Peace Corps volunteers back then. So I wound up working for International Paper in a beverage packaging division, lived in Memphis for a couple of years, did business development in Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and then moved back to Latin America. Then was married, became married at the time, and moved with my then wife Maura to El Salvador, of all places. And so we lived in El Salvador for 5 years. I ran a number of beverage packaging businesses from El Salvador, Colombia, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, and sort of covered the whole region of Latin America, and really cut my teeth as sort of a general manager, business operator, and then got the itch to be an entrepreneur. By this time, we had two beautiful young girls were born, and I just decided, the corporate life wasn't for me. I didn't imagine myself having that career, and I really, in many ways, wanted my daughters to see me, not so much as an entrepreneur, but living my own life. Just how do I want to live my life? Sort of the freedom to do that. And so I had been drinking coconut water all, over the years in Latin America. And now that I was a sort of supplier in the beverage industry, I got interested in tracking the trends and what was happening at the time. There were brands like Vitamin Water taking off and getting some success. So the big idea for me was, wow, I drink coconut water all the time. I get it's a powerful, rehydrating properties of electrolytes that it contains naturally. It's grown all over the world, and the water is literally thrown away as a waste product because most of the industry was for the meat and oil. Could I take this waste product, turn it into a healthy beverage, sort of a natural sports drink in a way, figure out how to make it hip and cool, and build, a brand and an industry. So quit my job and moved with my young family to New York in 2004 to launch it. And that thus began that new phase of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. So you took Zico full cycle, sold it. And that's a whole episode, and obviously it's a whole book in itself. But let's talk about kind of more the present tense. What motivated you to reacquire Zico after
Uh,
you had let that go? Because we all know our businesses become our babies, and it can be hard to let it go. And then
uh,
the thought of taking it back is, wow, I'd love to know what happened there. What was going
right,
on?
really so fascinating. When I think back on it, yeah, for certainly a number of years, 9 years running Zico. To a certain extent, I was Zico. Zico was me, right? That was my identity. Fortunately, I did some work and understood identity, personalities, personas, what roles you take on. And in the preparation for the sale, I knew, okay, I'm going to need to separate this identity. To a certain extent, I was ready for that. It had been 9 pretty tough years. I felt like, hey, this was my two beautiful daughters. Zico was my rambunctious son. He got off to the Harvard of the beverage industry at Coca-Cola. It wasn't my problem anymore. I thought I was done. And I had moved on. It was ready to do other things. In many ways, I can see now I didn't want to be defined by Zico. I didn't want to be defined by beverage alone. And so I actively became an angel investor in a lot of different businesses and industries, predominantly health and wellness, but I did some tech, I did some environmental, alternative energy, some ed tech, a few other areas. But the reality is I knew and loved health and wellness. And so I wound up making a number of personal investments and then formed this first investment firm called Power Plant, believing that, hey, I can, take my entrepreneurial learning and turn it into sort of the other side of the table as an investor. And man, was that a tough, painful process as well. I learned that, being a successful entrepreneur is not in any ways good prep for becoming a good investor, right? So I had to unlearn a lot of habits, learn new habits. And we had a lot of wins, but we also had a lot of painful lessons. And so, but eventually we started to professionalize the firm, learn a lot. And along that way, I came this opportunity to buy Zico. So the backstory is Coca-Cola bought the company in 2013. We were still pretty small, about less than 50 million in revenue. and their system, they throw more away in a year out of one of their plants than we were selling in ZICO. And so the reality is just too small to work in their system. So they put it in the juice group and then the water group. They tried this route to market and that route to market. They kept the integrity of the brand and the quality of the supply chain. But of all things, they really screwed up the distribution. And this is an example of smart, capable people, but an organization that's not designed to function with small emerging brands. And the other thing I'll own is, to a certain extent, we built ZICO to sell to that. That was my goal from the beginning. The brand and the organization were not built to last. And so it didn't last. So they scaled it up to maybe 150 million. Meanwhile, our major competitor, Vita Coco, scaled to 500 million and went public. And so Coca-Cola, in the midst of COVID, decided, like a lot of major corporations did, they're going to focus on their core. So anything under $1 billion in revenue was potentially on the chopping block. ZICO was among them. So we looked at it as an investment firm, but now took rigorous criteria we do for underwriting and diligence. What's the growth potential? What really happened? How healthy is the category? Can this, does the supply chain support it? Is there a real economic opportunity here? And given my personal background, even though I had no economic interest, I recused myself from what we call our investment committee process to make sure I wasn't biasing the system. But we looked at it and it made sense. Massive category. The category was still growing by 20% per year. ZICO had been the number 2 brand in the US, number 1 or 2. We saw the opportunity. So we decided to buy it. So we bought only the brand, which meant we had to rebuild all the supply chain and all the systems. We put in a world-class team to run it. I learned my lessons. I was a really good operator, but there's better people out there than me. I became an active chairman of the board, and this team started to build it back. So it's been now 4 years, and I'll tell you what, not that much easier second time around. It's not that much easier. It's a little bit easier, but we effectively were starting from scratch because the brand literally hit 0 market share by the time we took it over. COVID, made our life complicated, took freight from 2,000 a container to 20,000 a container, right? So all the competitive dynamics our other brands face. And so, the reality is, you have to face reality. Reality is what it is, right? And so it's been tough, to be very frank. But the business is now starting to really click. We're in our 5th year now, 2025, kicking off, maybe even fourth, sort of 4th year, 3.5 years, I guess, we've been running it. And had to put a lot more money than we expected. It's taking a lot longer, but this time it's being built to last. We're building this thing so it can endure, whether it's acquired, standalone, whatever it is. This time I'm gonna make sure we get it right.
Let me ask you about that. The difference in the mindset when the first time when you were building it, I mentioned that we really focus on building your business like you're going to sell it. Do
Yeah.
you see, so first of all, step back. Did it feel good when the investment committee came back after you had recused yourself and validated the fact that it was a viable business still? Did that feel good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. One thing I've learned is the reality of, these biases, these interests, these personal attachments we have, and the ability to separate myself from them and sort of be the observer in many ways, one might say. And so this was a case where I could do both. And I also, what the beauty of ZICO for me was, I think from the moment we came up with that name and the image, and it was a we. There were a number of people involved. My sister, an architect, was a designer. My wife Moore was involved. We had partners involved. From that moment forward, this wasn't mine. I did feel, some might say in the spiritual realm, this is a child of the universe, like I do with my kids. They're not mine, right? I'm just a guardian and shepherd along the way. So I could look at ZICO with passive eyes, and yes, I could feel pride, but I could also just see the reality of the pros and cons of this. And I could also see there were 1,000 people that helped make ZICO what it was, including consumers like you, right? That embraced it and brought it along. So yes, I felt some pride, and I felt like a fun observer, like, wow, isn't that fascinating? To see that it actually has this potential still.
Yeah. I know that it's a silly question to ask you that because of course you're going to feel good, but I think if for listeners and for me too to be able to feel that that good feeling because business is so darn hard and if people knew how hard it was they would never do this, especially when you are designing. Obviously you were designing the business to sell to Coca-Cola the first time, but you deeply cared about your suppliers and
Yeah.
your supply chain and having, ethically sourced products and making sure that the growers and everyone was taken care of. And so I just want everyone to kind of absorb that feeling, that good feeling, because we have so many rough feelings as entrepreneurs.
Look, it's a great point, and I'll reflect back on one thing as well. As soon as the announcement was made that Coca-Cola was intending to sell off or shut down ZICO, I got a call from a guy that Chris Weavers, that was our head of operations and supply in Asia for years. I worked with him for years, and he said, "Mark, look, I know this is happening. I'm sure you've got better things to do than be involved in ZICO, but we've done so much work with the growers. We've done so much work with the supply chain. I would like your help to make sure the brand lands in good hands. People are going to care about this." And immediately, that sparked my interest again, because we did do a lot of work, and I love that work. And so I went back, and I was blown away to see what had started as a just little idea had built into, I met women-owned businesses that have become multimillionaires on just supplying coconuts, right? Employing companies that had started as little sheds in the back cracking coconuts that now had multimillion-dollar facilities and employed hundreds of people, right? Not only for Zika, but for the whole industry. I just felt privileged to be a part of that. We all stand on the shoulder of giants. We play our part, right? My part happened to be leadership in that way at that time. And I think that's helpful for me to remember, right? It also does ease the burden a little bit that I'm not alone, right? And knowing that, God, talk about enduring, it gives me the ability to know that there can be a shared sense of freedom, right? The freedom can be very individual, but it can also be shared. And by sharing that allows me to work longer and harder and, do this again for another decade or more.
Yeah, the multi-generational impact you're having is astronomical when you think about the what started as a shed and has become a factory, and the children and then the grandchildren are getting into the business, and cousins, and so many people have a livelihood that wouldn't have had one before. It's amazing. So so you're in a bit of a different role now. You're working more on the business versus in the business. How has your approach to Zico changed since you first took ownership? How do you look at it?
Yeah. You know what? I'll give you one interesting example. So I put a team in place, professionals I'd known for many years from the beverage industry that are really world class in what they do. But the business got to a point where, I began to realize we need some different skill sets, a skill set I don't have and that they didn't have. So we just brought in a new CEO, and that was challenging, right? To talk to guy Tom that I've known for years and tell him, that he wasn't the right person to be CEO going forward, but he knew it. He was self-aware enough to know it. And so he said, look, I'll play whatever role you want me to play, including leaving, right? But he now has moved in the chief sales officer under this new CEO. And that's something that has been helpful for me. I mean, I've learned so much since building Zico. I've invested personally in 40 businesses, had a lot of losses and a fair amount of winners. We've invested as first power plant and now GroundForce in almost 40 businesses. Some big wins like Beyond Meat, some failures, Liquid Death, ON plant-based protein that we sold. So I've seen so many different examples. So I try to always to be aware of where my biases are, aware of where my blind spots are, aware of where I may be denying, avoiding, bearing things, and surround myself with a team that can complement that. So Zico has a very strong board of directors. It is not my company. I do not make all the decisions. My team and GroundForce challenges me all the time. Sometimes they'll bring my partner in GroundForce, Dan, in to make sure I'm being, there's sort of a counterbalance there. The board has, outsiders that are strong and determined. The team is strong and determined because I got opinions, right? And I have history here, and people may defer to me, but that's not always what's best, right? So we created an environment that's radical communication, radical transparency. We leave a space for emotions. I've sat in a board meeting and cried and said during difficult times, I don't know what to do here. And I think I should know. And just, one young guy on our team, Adam, went to my partner, Dan, and said, Dan asked him how it's going, and he's been in, investment banking and private equity. And he said, Mark cried in a board meeting recently. I've never seen that before. And Dan said, well, how was he? He said, I think it was amazing. Like, we actually got to something we wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. And I view that as part of my obligation too, is share with young professionals what it means to be human, and how do you be a human, entrepreneur, a human leader, a human investor. It doesn't mean you don't make brutal decisions. Doesn't mean you don't focus on the bottom line. But I feel like I can do this for the next 20 or 30 years if I allow myself to be human. And I also think we get better results.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how is your view as you spent so much of your life? Well, first of all, you had some very valuable career time as an employee, very valuable time, and then as an entrepreneur, and now as an investor. How do you look at entrepreneurship now, or do you look at entrepreneurship now maybe any differently than because of your role as an
Oh,
investor?
radically differently.
Yeah.
The first thing is, yeah, I was never a top student. I never was terrible, but I wasn't a top student. But I always um, sort of didn't understand how, what it was like, you know, to compare and contrast, right?
Mhm.
Now we look at 1,000 businesses a year, a
Mhm.
thousand.
A
I've
thousand.
personally
Wow.
talked to
Yeah.
everyone, but our team, we make 3 to 4 investments, maybe. Last year, zero. We didn't see anything great. We didn't make a single investment. So what I can see now is compare and contrast. And it's amazing when you look across all these businesses to see what world class really looks like, right? From the individual and from the business, and how they interplay. And so I've learned so much, and I have even more respect for entrepreneurs. First of all, the naivete it takes to go into this, the tenacity it takes to see that through. I know how lonely it is at the top, how very often, entrepreneurs tend to their businesses, their team, they don't tend to themselves. I love what you say about, get out in one piece. I've redefined what success looks like for me. And I see that, there's this myth, you know, have a great idea, work your ass off, make a ton of money, and then you'll be free. I see how that doesn't always happen. I know millionaires, centimillionaires, billionaires that, I'm sorry, they're not free. They're stuck in just a little bit more, next deal, whatever. Their health is crap. Their relationships are crap. I went through my own struggles on that, feeling like I made it and realizing, yeah, not quite. So I now look for entrepreneurs that can build, sort of personal freedom into everything they do, so that they win no matter what. They win no matter what. Now, and I want to win in business, but I also want to work with people that are great people, that are concerned about their life and the people around them. And that's really, really tough. But I've realized, I think that delivers better results, and it's certainly the kind of people we want to work with, that are both, they're not just missionaries, they're not trying to just save the world. They're not only mercenaries that will kill, their mother to make a buck, but there's a way to bridge both. That, to your point, make an impact, build a business that will last, that will make money, and also, spread an impact that's beyond just the business. That's a personal one. So I believe I'm building relationships that are going to last for the rest of my life, right? We have entrepreneurs that have gone on to become advisors, board members, investors in our funds, entrepreneurs that are repeats, right? So I love just building that sort of community.
Came from a family of non-entrepreneurs. So, what are your tips for obviously when people come to you, if they are pitching to you, they've got a certain gift if they've gotten to the table with you.
Yeah.
But I know that you know a lot of people and you know entrepreneurs at a lot of different levels. What would be your advice to young entrepreneurs or innovators who really have a new idea and but obviously they have a lot of naysayers? What is your advice to people to as far as staying on their path and committing being committed to their vision or feeling freedom to commit to their vision when they're faced with criticism from others?
The first thing, the first thing I'd say is anybody that's coming to me expecting to get encouragement, they're not going to get in the first conversation. My first conversation with an early stage entrepreneur is, why on earth would you want to do this? You know, and what I'll often say is, okay, let me ask you this. Are you willing to commit to this for at least a decade, knowing that you've got more than a 90% chance that you're never going to make any money on it and it's going to fail? Oh, you think you're an exception? You're not, right? And you're probably not going to make a lot of money along the way either. So if you're doing it and you're probably not going to make the impact you want because the business is probably going to fail. And I can give you a list like everybody points to the successes, right? We have beverage entrepreneurs that will show us a slide of all the exits that have happened, right? 20 of them in the last, number of years. What they're not showing is that 5,000 that have failed or become zombies that sort of last forever. So the reason I do that is because the person that has a shot is the one that says, I don't care. You know what? I think I'm an exception. I do. But you know what? I might not be. I'm doing it anyway. I mean, what else am I going to do? Am I going to get a job? Like, I don't want to get a job. I'm doing this. And so it's going to work out or it's not. They've got a shot. They've got a shot. Because anybody that's going into this assuming they're going to make money is kidding themselves, right? And they're in for a brutal ride, and they're probably the ones that are going to try to convince themselves again and again, and they're probably among the least likely to succeed. So, but if somebody's got that audacity and got the tenacity, then they're not going to be discouraged by anyone, including me, and they've got a shot. Now, once they get past that, a few things that I encourage. One is maniacal focus, right? Most entrepreneurs I find are trying to do way too much. They're trying to boil the proverbial ocean, right? Too many products at too many places, too much distribution. I encourage, I'll give you one example. I met some young entrepreneurs that were starting a beverage business. They had an idea for sort of healthy shots, like old wheatgrass, if you remember that, but a fresh pressed juice with, super high nutrient dense ingredients. And they had an opportunity to expand into Whole Foods almost out of the gate on the West Coast. And I said to them, why bother? Like, if you can't build a business that can be on a trajectory to do $5 million in Southern California alone, you're wasting your time. But if you can, you probably have a tiger by the tail. So focus, focus, focus. So they focused on 150 stores. And that's all they did for 6 months. Demo, event, testing, pricing, limited, very limited distribution that they basically managed themselves. And they got to a point where they were selling, 5 or 10x what any other brand would typically do in that space. And that convinced us to invest because we saw that they were that hyper, hyper, hyper focused. Less is more, focused on, whatever. If you have to grow, expand distribution or expand consumers to grow, what's wrong? Like, how do you get into a consumer's mind, be it a product or service that, really becomes a daily habit? And if you can figure that out, growth becomes a hell of a lot easier after that.
So, Mark, I know that there's ZICO, but there's hundreds of other things out there. And you've also been through an incredibly personal, challenging time, which really can drain your energy. But what are you most inspired by right now?
Oh, look, at this very moment, I am so inspired by the outpouring of help and support I've seen, for me and others around these LA fires. And it just gives me such a renewed sense in the human spirit and in the resilience of the human condition to just go on. And it excites me more than ever to go back and work even more closely with our businesses, in many ways to be both more human and more brutal, right? Like, so I feel like, okay, I know what I want to accomplish this year. I know what we want to accomplish this year. I'm going to be brutal about it, right? Because otherwise, I'll go, I lost everything. I'll go live in, Greece for the rest of my life, right? If I'm going to do this, I want to build businesses that are built to last with great people. So I'm leaning in more. I'm leaning in even more to the businesses we work with, right? I'm also leaning more in the personal relationships and connections I have. I'm leaning more in the sharing. I'm realizing that, hey, if I can help people learn, how to experience loss, how to deal with the personal realities that we all go through while being a leader and an entrepreneur and an investor, I'm happy to do that. So I expect to do more of this, more writing, and leaning in further with my companies. And I feel like in some ways I got a new lease on life. I'm gonna love it till the end. Love it till the end. I'm gonna go into that grave beat up, bruised, cut up, burned. I don't care. I'm gonna live and enjoy and love my life.
Beautiful lesson. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your heart so authentically and your compassion. I've seen it for months now as you and I have communicated about different things, and I've seen how you engage with your team on LinkedIn. And you are one person that what you see is what you get. And I really love and appreciate that about you.
Thank you, Tricia. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate what you do and your, giving. I love your approach, and I love how you're, I think you're speaking to entrepreneurs with a unique voice. And that's I appreciate that and I applaud that and I want to support that.
All right, Mark. Well, I will release you to get on with your day. I just am so grateful. Thank you again for being
You're
here and
welcome. You're
for the
welcome.
team. And I look forward to however our paths may cross in the future.
Yes, I'm sure they will. I'm
Thank
sure they
you.
will. Take care, Tricia.
Thank you. Bye.